What are the gene keys?
System of personal transformation rooted in the healing of our shadow patterns and the transforming of them into gifts, and that's really it. So it begins with the problems that inside us and our trauma, and it's about facing and accepting our trauma and forgiving and letting go, and then discovering that inside our traumas specifically are very powerful gifts, and they give rise to our true purpose in life. So that's really the process in an elevator pitch.
Okay. And then we mentioned the idea of being free of fear, having an absence of fear in the body, and that most of us, and I said, look, I'm aware of the fear that lives in me in this way and that way, etc. Yeah. How would the Gene Keys approach help us work with our physical body of fear that manifests in, many different ways?
Yeah. So there's a very simple single technique at the core of the Gene Keys, and I wrote a little book about it called The Art of Contemplation. It's under 100 pages. It's what I would give to, I wrote the book because my father didn't understand what I did when he was alive, and he said, I don't understand this big book on the
We're always trying to get our parents to understand what we're doing.
Yeah, so he had no idea. He said, I don't understand this big thing on Gene Keys, any of it. All right, so I said, okay, I'll put something together for you. And I wrote this very short book on contemplation, which he really liked, actually. He was a, interesting man. And it's the contemplation is the technique. And it's about creating a space around our fear, around our shadow patterns, around our traumas. And it's about really having the courage to look at those patterns. And the Gene Keys give you a language. So out of that chart, that profile that you can get for free on genekeys.com, anyone can do it now while I'm talking, go genekeys.com, free profile. And what you'll see, you'll get lots of words. And you'll see nasty sounding words, and you'll see lovely sounding words, and they're all kind of layered over each other. And so the nasty ones, the shadows, are patterns they're victim patterns that we've inherited. They're archetypal. This is an archetypal system, right? And as you said, it's rooted in the I Ching. So there are 64 of these patterns, 64 different shadow patterns. I'll give you an example. One of the shadows is called the shadow of corruption. Right, so they're patterns throughout humanity, as well as being patterns that are embedded in us in our biology. So it doesn't mean that if you have the shadow of corruption that you're a corrupt person, but it means that there's always a corruption of truth at the shadow level, at that frequency of being, and it does manifest socially as corruption, but it also means that if you have that particular key, you probably will have to deal with corruption in your life in some form or another. Maybe you marry someone, or you get attracted to her, or so this stuff happens to you. Maybe you become a police officer, who knows? But it's in your dharma somewhere. And so you get to learn and heal through it, but it's something embedded inside you. And then inside that corruption is a gift. Right, and what's the gift? It's the gift of equilibrium, and the equilibrium is when you have kind of managed yourself through the shadow, and the shadow is always a victim state. It's always a part of us that gives up, or it's a depressive part, or it's it's a part that blames someone else, or blames the government, or it likes to not take responsibility for itself. So as we start to take responsibility for our own patterns, that's when the gift comes, and we achieve a different level of equilibrium. It doesn't mean we get rid of the shadow. It means we kind of start to manifest the gift level. So there are 64 of these gifts and 64 of these shadows. So conflict is another one, right? You might have conflict, the shadow of conflict. And so that shows up in your relationships, probably. It does it for most of us. But if you specifically have that one, you're going to meet a lot of conflict all around you through your relationships. But the gift in that conflict is the gift of diplomacy. So you're going to be trained in the art of diplomacy. And contemplation is how you put that into practice. You contemplate your gene keys over time, and you don't just think about them. It might start with thinking about them, but then you feel your way into them. You kind of saturate yourself in them. And it's an ongoing process. It's not something that just suddenly happens. You don't get it in a weekend workshop. Gene keys takes time. Contemplation takes time. It's deep material about you. You're going to be contemplating this shadow for a while until you see it in your life. You're going to see it. You're going to witness it in your relationships. It'll come reflected. The moment you put your attention on it, it will start appearing everywhere. And then you can start to come to terms with it, and you can start to kind of heal yourself, and you can start to experience breakthroughs and epiphanies and transformations. And that's why I say Gene Keys is a system of transformations. It's gritty, though, because it starts with the shadow. It starts with difficulty. It starts with difficult words that we don't like to attach to ourselves. And you have to look at them and think of yourself through that lens, and then you start to see it, and you're like, it's my blind spot. I know it is. I see it now. And then out of that comes these gifts. And there's a third layer, which is called the Siddhi. Siddhi is a Sanskrit word meaning a divine attribute. And there's 64 of those as well, a Siddhi. So if you took, conflict and diplomacy, the Siddhi of that one would be peace. So peace is hidden in conflict. It's interesting. So every shadow has a Siddhi, has a higher essence hidden in it, and it's the reason for suffering, actually. So your gene keys show you how your suffering is layered into you. So in that sense, it's akin to many ancient teachings, or shamanic, where you go down into the underworld, or the Buddhist teaching of suffering, where you go inside and you really meet yourself, and you meet your less kind of nice parts, and then you begin to get to know them, and as you get to know them, they start to transform into these gifts, creative gifts, and eventually, over a long period of time, they'll start to flower into the Siddhis, into these higher forms. But that might take a long time. It depends.
Would you be willing,
yeah.
Richard, to give me an example from your own life of a shadow pattern and the contemplation you engaged in? Because I think a lot of times when you hear a word like contemplation, you think, okay, I'm going to think about this thing. Yeah. How is it going to actually change? How am I getting to the core of it such that it's turning into a gift and then a Siddhi? But I think if you used a personal example, that would be interesting.
Before I do that, I'll just say that the gene keys are they're a sort of neuro-linguistic programming language that reflects the mathematics of our DNA. So DNA is made up of 64 structures, right? And there's 64 keys, and it's rooted in the I Ching, which is made up of these different 6 lines and combinations. So the geometry and the structure of the I Ching is exactly the same structure as DNA. Exactly. There are books written on this by geneticists, right? It's an incredible thing, but it's also true. So the language of the gene keys is coded archetypally to match that. So it really resonates at a very physical level. And I was a body worker for years. Before I got into any of this stuff, I was a body worker. My specialty was the belly. I worked on bellies. I worked on people's traumas. I helped them release patterns from very deep within their biomes. And so I'm not the head guy that you might think I am. I'm actually a very physical person. And so contemplation, I've learned, is a very physical experience, but it has layers to it. So an example from my life is I have the key of doubt. Right, very key, very sort of in a really kind of important place. And so I had that experience, and then I had a huge amount of doubt come into my life of well, who are you? You're nothing. You're no one. You don't know anything. You don't know this stuff. You're I lived with that doubt, that self-doubt for years, and I didn't want to say anything. I tried to go into denial. I reacted to the doubt at different times in different ways. It was very uncomfortable. Doubt's a horrible thing to live with. it's deeply, undermining, and it makes you feel bad about yourself and weak and, self-judgmental and all kinds of like constriction right in the body. So it's a constriction energy. All the shadows are constriction energies. And then the gift of doubt is inquiry, right? And you could take any gene key and it's the same story. So there's 64 of them, but it's the same story, just through a slightly different lens. And the story is, you have to have the courage to inquire into the shadow. So you have to have the courage to look into the doubt. So I had to look into that doubt and go, well, first of all, it feels awful because I just feel bad. I feel afraid. I just, it doesn't make me feel good at all. And when I close my eyes or I try and meditate, it's just there. It's not. I can't even call it doubt. It's just a feeling. It's just a feeling of deep unease in my body. And so as I realized that doubt in layers over the years, I started to talk about it, and I started to share about it, and I started to admit that I had this doubt, and I started to be vulnerable and just go, well, I don't know. One part of me just feels really super clear, and then the other part is just like this mind that's like, nah, nothing. You can't say that. You can't go out and tell people that you're a prophet. Don't be ridiculous. You're just your ego, vain, spiritual vanity, and all of that stuff. And I have a very kind of, I can be mean with myself. So over the years, I've learned to go much easier on myself, and the inquiry has softened me hugely, so that I'm no longer judgmental towards myself. And now I give myself, I treat myself like a parent would treat a kind of wounded child. There's a part of me that just understands that doubt might be there, and and every now and again it might flare up again. But it's sort of, I don't know. It's no longer part of who I am. It was just stuff. It was fear. It was, and underneath it is this beautiful kind of flower. And that gift of inquiry led to me creating the gene keys. So it's because of my doubt that I figured out a way out of the doubt. And along the way, I built a system so that other people could also help figure their way out. But they're going to take different routes, because there's all kinds of the gene keys. Every gene key is a ladder, and so you can your ladder might look different from mine. And eventually the Siddhi, the highest aspect of that is truth. So it goes doubt, inquiry, truth. And truth is in the cells. Truth is not about fact or anything, like facts can be taken away and changed. Truth is truth, right? And one of the things you realize from truth, from the view of the highest, the Siddhi, is that even doubt is truth. So it's like the perfection of when you get to that heightened state, that transcendent state, it's not actually really, doesn't really feel transcendent. It just feels really self-loving and self-accepting. And that's the process that I've been in for years. And now I realize that contemplation is a really, really powerful tool for anyone. Because, it might start with thinking, but then it goes deeper and deeper, and then it becomes feeling. And then it goes deeper and deeper. And what it does, it starts to open us up to, to epiphanies, to breakthroughs, to, and eventually the contemplation becomes so deep as a state that you're living in that it becomes physical. So you're actually, your whole body enters a state of contemplation, and you're not even doing it consciously. But it's a hard thing to explain, but because it's one of those techniques that you kind of, it isn't really a technique. And everyone is so obsessed with techniques today that they want, like, how do I do that? And actually it's something it's a sense of gentleness, it's a sense of patience, it's a sense of ease. In the little book I wrote, I kind of give lots of exercises at the back. I say, look, it's like the contemplative way to walk is to meander. The contemplative way to think or to dialogue is to sort of, to just to talk without kind of having a direction. It's about bringing the essence of a relaxed, easeful way into everything you do. And it doesn't mean you can't be sort of have good boundaries and all those things, but it's a very yielding kind of state of consciousness that then eventually comes into your mind, and you become incredibly lucid. So it's it's an equivalent to meditation. It's much easier than meditation. It's less kind of boring than mindfulness, if you don't mind me saying that. It's more creative. It's more fun.
Discover on-demand videos and docuseries, explore a full schedule of daily life classes, and become part of an incredible community. At Sounds True One, we invite you inward to find your way, your way.